Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Kim and today we're going to do my November wrap up. Now, November was quite a bit of a fail. Not in a fail by the amount of books that I read, a fail in that I did not complete my Bookopoly TBR. Out of the 5 books on Bookopoly, I only managed to read one of them. That means I'm taking a forfeit next month. Let's get into what I did actually read. So in November I read 13 books. I read a total of 3,947 pages. Bit of a dip for me, usually it's about 4,000 plus, but it was close to that, so not bad. I read an average of 131 pages per day. And rating wise, I gave out 0 1-stars. I gave out 1 2-star, 5 3-star, 6 4-star, and I had a 5-star read this month, which averaged out to about 3.5 for the month, which is about on par for me, so that's not too bad. Should we get into what I actually read last month? So the first book that I read last month was a Rory Gilmore book club book for October, because I missed that one. It was to read a banned book. So for this I read The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Now this, you could tell it was written quite a while ago. It wasn't the best for me. So for that reason I only got 3 stars. The second book that I read this month was for this month's Rory Gilmore book club, and that was to read a book that is a non-fiction. So for this I decided to read Who Moved My Cheese? Love that title, by Spencer Johnson. And for me, this was so repetitive, and I get the whole point behind it, but it was too repetitive for me, and it took too long to get to the point. So for that reason, although I did like following the little mice with the cheese and I got the whole story, it was my biggest flop of the month. It only got 2 stars. And then we moved into the Final Book Support Group. Final Book Support Group is a book club started by Steph over at Steph Loves to basically give us a bit of a push to read sequels and final books in series, and trust me, it works. So for this we got a bingo board with a few prompts on it, so let's see what I went through and what I rated them. So the first book of the Final Book Support Group and my third book of the month was to read a final book. Simple. I'm in the middle of quite a few series. I'm not near the end of that many. So this was a little bit tougher, but I did find one, and it was A Battle for the Skies by Laura Ellen Anderson. This is the third and final book in this series, and I loved it. I absolutely love the characters in this book. They are so funny and just so lovable. So for that reason, it did get a 4-star. My fourth book of the month and my second for Final Book Support Group was to read a manga or graphic novel. So for my manga or graphic novels, usually I go to Scribd, Everand, and yeah, this month I was in Scribd jail, or Everand's jail. So I didn't have that many to choose from, but I did choose Fence Volume 2. I can't believe it took me so long to pick this up. I love the characters in this one, and it's so heartwarming, and you can see where this is going to go. But I loved it, so it got 4 stars. The next one was on Final Book Support Group to read a continuation station. It was also my Agatha Christie Poirot book for this month. It was Third Girl. Again, not the strongest Agatha Christie I've read. It took a while to get through this one, and so for that reason it only got 3 stars. The next Final Book Support Group book was to read a book with full colours on the cover, and this just also happened to be a final book. I didn't realise it until I started logging the book in Goodreads that it was a final book, but that is Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. How did I not realise this was a final book, and how did I not realise that I hadn't finished this series yet? So for me, Ruin and Rising wasn't as good as the previous 2, in my opinion. The characters were still likeable, but the plot just fell a little bit shorter than the other books that I've read in this series, so for that reason I got a 3-star. The next Final Book Support Group book was to pick a poll pick. So I did use Discord and I put a poll in. I got the book that I was going to read, and then I ended up in Neverland Jail, so I couldn't read that book, so I went with the second highest voted. And so for that reason, I read one that I didn't think I was going to like that much, mainly because the previous two just didn't hit the mark for me, but that was about to change with this one. It is Moonraker by Ian Fleming. This is a James Bond book. It is the third in the series, and I really enjoyed this one. I loved the characters. The writing didn't seem as bad as the previous two, so it was going in the right direction. So for that reason, it got 4 stars. The final book on the Final Book Support group was to read an anticipated sequel. For this, I decided to pick up The Beast by Katie Roberts. Again, I was a little bit dubious about this one because it was Beauty and the Beast, and that's one of my favourites. I was a little bit wary going into this one, which is why it took me so long to pick it up. But I'm glad I did. This was brilliant. It got 4 stars. The next book that I read this month was for the Catch Up Book Club. It was The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie, and I'm so surprised that I managed to get this done before the live show because I was barely into it and I had so much of the book to read, but I did it before the live show. This again wasn't as good as the previous ones in the series. I did prefer Best Have Cold a lot more than this one, but I do like Joe Abercrombie's humour, so it did get 3 stars. The 10th book that I read this month was because I went to Amsterdam and wanted to read a book that was set in Amsterdam. So for that reason, I picked up Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. This was pretty good. It's weird to say that I enjoyed it because of what it's all about, you know, about this girl who went into hiding during the war in this tiny little room in the back of this house that I did see the front of when we went to Amsterdam. This young girl was so disconnected from what was actually going on that she was talking about shopping, she was talking about boys, and then she started to realise what was happening. So for me, this one was pretty good. It got 4 stars. The 11th book that I read this month was the buzzword book for this month. It was to read a book with good in the title. So for that reason, I decided to pick up The Good Soldier by Ford Maddox Ford, and it was okay. Again, you could tell that it was written a long time ago. It took so long for anything to really happen. So for me, it was a low 3-star. The 12th book for this month was because I went to Amsterdam, and every time I go away, I decide to go into the supermarket and just pick up some random book. And because Steph from Steph Loves did rate this quite highly, I decided to pick up My Roommate is a Vampire, and I loved this book. This was the 5-star of the month by Jenna Levine. This, oh my God. Frederick, I want my own Frederick. I love Frederick. Cassie was sassy and fun and everything you want in a leading lady, but Frederick was just so... Because he's an old vampire, he was old school, you know? And it just, oh. And then you had Reginald as well, who brought the humour. I loved this book, 5 stars. Pick it up if you can. And then my last book was finally a Bookopoly book read. It was on Bookopoly to read my highest rated, and I'm so glad that this was the highest rated on my Goodreads at the time. It is God's Grave by J. Christoph. I read Nevernight last month, absolutely loved it, could not wait to get to God's Grave. Everand Jail, oh, that made me wait so long to pick this up, but I'm so glad I did. It's not as strong as Nevernight, I don't think, but it is still really good. The characters are phenomenal, and the atmosphere, the locations, just everything is brilliant about this world. So that reason, and it not being quite as good as Nevernight, I did give it a high 4-star. And I cannot wait to pick up the next one. So that was the 13 books that I read in November. Come and have a chat to me. What did you think? Have you read any of them? Is there any recommendations that you would give me on books to read next year? But yeah, that's the 13 books I read in November. As always, down in my description box, you can find a link to all of my socials. Come give me a follow on Goodreads, on Instagram and on X. You can like this video, you can comment, and you can subscribe if you really want to. Want to let me know you're here without actually talking to me, and then leave the vampire emoji for my favourite book last month. And I will see you next time. Toodles.